Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Allison. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is February the 12th, 1990, and my home group's the Design for Living group. It's meeting right now in Nashville, Thursdays at 7 o'clock. It's an open discussion meeting, and the last meeting of the month is it's a closed discussion, but it's an open speaker meeting the last Thursday of the month. I'm really glad to be here. Congratulations, 3 Legacies group on a year, man. That's just really cool. I want to thank Issa for inviting me and for everybody bringing all the great food. Man, the food was just out of this world. And I love Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Coming to AA rescued me from being a despondent, hopeless, angry, lonely person. And it's opened up avenues where I can be the kind of person I always wanted to be. But alcoholism got in the way. I came here when I was 39 years old, and I really thought my life was over, and I really didn't care if it was over. It was one miserable day after another, and I had no direction, no God in my life, nothing. And everything good and decent in my life I had just about trashed, and I thought I couldn't get any better. And here I am standing up here today, with you good people. It's just amazing what God has done in my life and a lot of other people in this room too. My alcoholism didn't start out that way. It started out being great. I started out in a family where both my parents drank a lot. They started a business about the time I was born, and they worked real hard. They worked every day really hard trying to make this business, make a go of it. And then they drink at night to unwind. And then they drink with their friends on the weekends, to celebrate. And I thought, man, that's what you do. But every now and then somebody'd overshoot, drink a little too much and overshoot the mark, and bad stuff would happen. And I remember thinking, well, they just drank too much. You're supposed to apparently just drink enough and have a good time. And when I was about 14 or 15, I went out with some older boys, and they were passing around this bottle of Gilby's gin that they'd stolen out of somebody's liquor cabinet. And I took a sip out of it, and I thought it tasted awful, like everybody else did. But I thought, you're supposed to drink. So I got past the taste of it pretty quickly, and I overshot the mark the first time. I remember feeling really good, a feeling that I'd never had before. I felt comfortable. I felt not apart from these older guys that were probably a year older than I was at the time. I felt like I fit in. I had a great time. And then I don't remember much. And these guys took me home and dumped me off at my parents' house. And I remember stumbling down the hallway and getting into bed, and the bed started spinning. And are we the only people who put our foot on the floor thinking it's going to stop it, Well, that didn't stop it. By the way, I was at a conference last week in Arkansas, and a guy said if you put your foot on the floor and hold on to the wall, that it works. I wish I'd known that. I might not be standing up here, but I don't think that worked either. But I got really sick, and I woke up the next day. I just never felt so bad in my life. I mean, that just horrible hangover. And I remember my mother was talking to one of her friends on the phone and said, "Oh, Mike was so sick last night. He had some kind of stomach virus." So I got away with it too. And it never occurred to me not to drink anymore. I mean, it never occurred to me. I just said, well, I'm not going to drink gin anymore. And I got that feeling I was always looking for, that sense of ease and comfort that alcohol does for me, that it doesn't do for a non-alcoholic. I thought everybody drank got the same effect out of it that I do when I first came in, and I found out that's not true. Alcoholics I get an unnatural reaction to alcohol. It makes everything okay, just like that. And it doesn't do that for most people. That's why they don't drink. My wife, where's Diane? Diane's back there somewhere. I love my wife. My wife Diane's here tonight. I call her Sparky because she's so full of zest and zeal. She tells me her schedule every day. I feel like just taking a nap. And by the way, one time she told me of all the alcoholics and drug addicts she's ever dated, she likes me best. And that's as good as it gets for a guy like me. But Diane's not an alcoholic. And we'll go out sometime and she might order a drink, or she just might not even order a drink, which I don't understand that, if you could get a drink and not order one. But she might get a glass of wine or a drink or something, and then half the time she won't even finish it. And I'll catch myself looking at her drink like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you finishing that? And she'll say, well, I don't want any more. I'm starting to feel it. That's just sad. It's just sad. But she's not an alcoholic. And I heard a guy about a month ago say something I've never heard before. He said the difference between an alcoholic and a non-alcoholic is that a non-alcoholic drinks all the alcohol they want every time they drink. But they don't want as much as I do, apparently. So at any rate, I spent the next 25 years just trying to not overshoot the mark because alcohol did something special for me. And I didn't realize I was doing that. I never realized I built my life around drinking after that, but I did. Once I got sober and did an inventory of a first step, I really found out that's what happened to me. I used to say my grades went down, when I started drinking, but they weren't that good to start with. But my grades went down, and I just built this party man atmosphere. And I'm loud, bare-chested, barefoot, drive fast, music cranked up to 11. I mean, I was just a heathen when I was a teenager. But one thing I did was I worked for this family business after school in the summertime for two reasons. Number one, it made me the money I wanted to lead this lifestyle I was starting to have. And the other thing is I thought if I was a hard worker, I'd get my dad's respect. I was always looking for my dad's approval my whole life. I took that into my adult life. So I thought if I was a hard worker, he'd think something of me. So I'm working hard, I'm playing hard. And I get out of high school, my parents sent me off to college. I went to what's now University of Memphis in Memphis, Tennessee. And up until that time, I was drinking a lot because the drug culture hadn't started then. But when I went to Memphis in the fall of 1968, it was almost immediate. There were these other things out there. And I want to tell you, I'm a real alcoholic. But as my friend Darren says, I like all those party favors out there too. So I just basically partied my way through 4 years of college, and I was about to finish college, and I meet this girl back there in the back, Diane, and I fell madly in love with her. I'm still smitten by her today. We've been together for a long time. We had our first date 52 years ago last week, and I just love this woman. And I'm a guy that's, I don't know about you, but I got good intentions. I got the best intentions of anybody. I'll make up my mind I'm going to do something, and I'll dress the part and get ready for it, and then I never would finish it. I found some old report cards sometime back when I was in grade school, and the teachers would write comments on the back after they give you your grades, and they'd always mark that on there that he needs to practice self-control. That was always on there. But the comments on there, I remember one of them said, Michael has great potential. And I told people, man, I got potential. That just means you hadn't done anything. That's what that means. That's all it means. So I had potential. So make a long story short, I lacked 6 hours of getting a degree in business management, and I dropped out of college because I met this girl that I was in love with, and I had a ready-made job at this family business. So I dropped out of school in Memphis and moved back to Nashville, and I go to work, and I stayed there 33 years till I retired from it. And Diane and I are dating, and we're not getting along too good after a while. And I didn't have any communication skills with people, and one day I just broke off the relationship with her. And I wouldn't tell her why. Later on, she asked me, well, why did you break up with me? And I said, well, you were just a little too controlling. I thought she was going to help me to death sometimes, but I couldn't talk to people about that, and I wasn't the best boyfriend in the world either, don't get me wrong. So we break up for almost a year. And then I had to get my wisdom teeth out. And they give you a bunch of drugs to do that. And so I go to this oral surgeon, and they said I need to bring somebody with me. So I brought my office manager with me, and they hooked me up to an IV and give me this stuff. And they could have pulled my jaw out. I wouldn't have cared. And they take my wisdom teeth out, and this guy leads me back to my apartment out in Bellevue. And he said, look, I got to call somebody to take care of you for a couple of hours, until this stuff wears off. And who can I call? And I'm just loaded on these drugs, and I write down, call Diane, and I wrote her work number down. Now, this guy knew I'd dated Diane, but he had no idea I'd been broken up with her for over a year. But he picks up the phone and calls her, and he said, hey, Diane, this is George, and Mike's had his wisdom teeth taken out. He needs you to come over and take care of it. And she's thinking, George who, Mike who? I mean, she had another guy living with her. But she came over on her lunch break, and I'm just loaded, and I start writing down, I love you, I want you back, move in with me, you know how we are. And she did. 2 days later. We've been together ever since. That was March 18th of 1975. Each March 18th we celebrate Tooth Day. So we get back together, and I get high on something else later on. I just look at her and I said, let's get married. So we got married a couple months later, and we start this life together. And so I'm working hard. I'm trying to be Mr. Businessman. My dad has the opportunity to leave the business for 4 years to do something else, and so I take over this business when I'm pretty young. But I'm young, and I'm hardworking and ambitious and all this stuff. I don't know how I did it, but somehow I did that. And so I'm working real hard, and we decided to start having a family. So Diane has 2 sons. By the way, our sons were 8 and 11 when I got sober. They're now 42 and 46. And so Diane's home raising kids, and I'm trying to be Mr. Businessman, and my alcoholism's getting worse all the time. And I'm thinking, I got this stress job, this big high-stress job. So I go to my doctor, and I said, look, I got this stress, this job is driving me nuts. And he said, well, here. So he wrote me a prescription for some tranquilizers. And then I started having these migraine headaches that were real painful, so he wrote me a prescription for some painkillers. And then I started having this crushing depression that he diagnosed as clinical depression, but it turns out, in my case, I only had untreated alcoholism that he didn't know about, because I was telling him I'd have a glass of wine every now and then when he'd ask me how much I drank. So I'm taking these antidepressants and these painkillers and these tranquilizers and all the street drugs I'm taking, and I'm washing all that down with Crown Royal, and I'm just trying to power through life and act like I am somebody. And on the inside, I am falling apart. I mean, I'm in my mid-30s, and I'm just falling apart. I had these intense feelings that I'm not good enough and that I'm a failure, and if people only knew who I was, they'd know they wouldn't do business with me. They wouldn't have anything to do with me. And so I'm just leading this lie on the outside. But this business is making me money. I'm pretty successful at it, so I'm buying all these things. If you feel bad on the inside, if you buy all this stuff, all these toys out here, people think you're a success. So I'm flashy on the outside, and I'm dying on the inside. And I start doing some really bizarre things as my alcoholism progressed. Diane and I bought a house when we were married about a year, and we live in the same house. It's on a long dead-end street on a really high ridge over in Nashville. And most of our neighbors don't have any landscaping or anything. They just have their houses in the woods. But I was in the landscaping business, so I'm trying to show off what a big shot I am. So I'm trying to grow grass in front of my house and have all these plants and stuff. But I had all these trees in my yard that were shading out all my grass and killing it, and then I'd have to rake all these leaves. And one day I just thought, well, I'll just cut all my trees down. And that'd been a pretty good plan, except I wasn't exactly sure where my property line was on one side of me. I knew where it was at the street because our front yards are pretty small, but our lot goes way down this steep hill. I mean, I've lived there since 1976. I've been down there maybe 2 or 3 times because it's straight up and down. But I got my compass, a compass and a plat where I bought my house, and I'll go wandering down this hillside, and I find this old rusted out fence post in the hillside, and I convinced myself that was my property line. And then I called up a surveyor, and I told him, I said, look, I found my property line, but I can't even see my house from where I found it. I said, I need you to mark this line. And these guys came out there, and they walked all the way down this steep hill with me, and they looked at what I showed them, and they said, we don't think this is right. They said that like 2 or 3 times. But say, I'm an alcoholic. I got a laser beam focus. I know everything, and if I'm paying you, you're going to do it my way. So these guys marked this line that I told them where my property line was, and when they got through putting these stakes and flags in the ground, they were almost touching my next door neighbor's house. I mean, it was closer than from here to that wall. Now, a sane person would have thought, well, maybe they're right. You know, since I got sober, I found out, you know, if you need a property line found, you can just call up a surveyor, and they'll come find the line for you. You don't even have to tell them where you think it is. But not me. I think this old goat, he's been using my property all this time. He's been using our land that he moved up here before we did, and I feel violated. I mean, that's insane. Well, I'm not waiting until he got back from Florida to discuss it with him. You know, I want these trees down now. So I called up another buddy of mine that had a tree surgery company, and he sent 2 of these big bucket trucks and all these guys with chainsaws, and they cut all these trees down between our houses. And it was a lot of trees. According to a jury of my peers, it was $50,000 worth of trees in 1984. Because when he got home, he wasn't happy with my surveying, and he sued me. And he should have, and he did. And he was so upset that he asked for a jury trial, which was kind of unusual in a civil case. And I had to sit through a 2-day jury trial for cutting this man's trees down. And I remember dressing up in a 3-piece suit. I had a vest and a big gold chain and a pocket watch. And I go strutting in the courtroom like I'm some dignified businessman that's been falsely accused. And I'd sweated all the way through the suit. I mean, I was a mess. I was chomping down these blue volumes in the bathroom of the courthouse during the recess to try to stay calm, you know, while his attorney just portrayed me as a lunatic for doing this. And they awarded him the $50,000 that he asked for, and they added $5,000 more punitive damages also that he didn't even ask for. Now, if you're new tonight, I'm trying to describe what a resentment is because I hate this guy. I think he's overreacting. I never took responsibility for anything I did. I made sure fault. And my story is about forgiveness and redemption. And the reason why I tell you all these details is I'm going to tell you how the 9th step straightened that out, because there's no way I could have straightened it out. And these people next door to us were wonderful people. Well, after he sues me, I made his life miserable for a long time. If I'd see him on our dead-end street, I'd ease my car over in his lane like I was playing chicken with him. I'd curse at him when he got his mail. I was terrible to this man. But I did something worse than that. A couple of years before I cut his trees down and he sued me, he knew I was in the landscaping business, and he came over and asked me if I could get him a weeping cherry tree for their yard. He said, "My wife thinks that's the prettiest tree there is." I said, "Yeah, I can do that. What else you want?" He said, "Well, I don't know anything." I said, "Well, ask her if there's any other shrubbery she wants." And I guess he thought I was trying to sell him something, but I was trying to act like a big shot. Well, he told me about some other plants that they wanted, and I asked him where he was going to plant them, and he showed me. So I got one of my crews to get this weeping cherry tree and these other plants and plant them in his yard. And he came over to my house and he wanted to pay me. He said, "Look, I didn't mean for you to plant this. I was hoping you'd just get it for me. How much do I owe you?" I mean, he just wanted to do business with his neighbor, but not me, the big shot. "Oh, you don't owe me anything." It's like, look at me. I'm a big shot. I don't need your money. These are my people. I'll let that, thank God y'all are my people now. But I'm thinking, I can just do these things. And I didn't do any of that for fun and for free. Not one bit. It's like, look at me, what a big shot I am. Well, a couple of years later, after I cut his other trees down and he sued me, I went over there the very next night with some herbicide and put on that weeping cherry tree and killed it. Wow, Diane, there's some Al-Anons in here. Usually the AAs laugh at that. Al-Anons go, "Oh." Glad you're here, by the way. The members that are Al-Anon here, if it wasn't for Al-Anon and Alateen, we wouldn't have our family, the family that we have today. I love that program. I never make light of anything of Al-Anon. I love the program of Al-Anon. So, this is how I'm treating my next door neighbor. And by the way, I used to think I didn't hurt anybody but myself. I said that early on, but that was such a lie. I mean, Diane had a great relationship with these people. They were an older couple, and Diane and our young sons would go over there and visit during the day while I was at work. Well, after all that happened, she didn't go over there anymore. And I've heard her say in her Al-Anon talk that if she was an Al-Anon, she would have continued to do that regardless of my actions. But she didn't have any recovery either. Well, in my mid-30s, the wheels just fall off. I start doing stuff I just thought I'd never do. I don't like talking about this, but it's part of our story. I started cheating on my wife. I knew it was wrong, but that's where alcoholism was taking me. My dad came back from this time gone away from the business and wanted his job back. And I told him, "No, you just need to retire now." And he drank like I did, so we had this violent clash to the point of where I brought my shotgun to work one day and I was going to shoot his Buick when he pulled in the driveway to let him know I didn't want him around. That's how I communicate with people. But I didn't do it, and I came home and I told Diane, and she said, well, finally, she'd been trying to fix me for years, and finally she said, "I don't know what to tell you, go see somebody." So I go to my doctor one more time, and I said, "Look, I don't know whether you want to put me in a nut house or what, but I was going to assassinate a Buick this morning. I know that's not a good idea." He said, "Well, go see this lady." So he set me up with a psychologist to go to the following Monday. And so I think, well, maybe I need to slow down on my drinking a little bit. Because I could slow down, cut back, or quit drinking entirely for periods of time. I quit for 8.5 months one time. It's the most miserable 8.5 months I've ever spent in my life. If you have a drinking problem, just stop drinking and you'll be fine. When I stopped drinking, that's when my alcoholism's the most painful because I got this itch inside I can't scratch, and sooner or later, I'm either going to drink again or do one of those other outside issues to make me feel okay again. So I tried doing that. But I quit that weekend. I thought, well, maybe I need to cut back a little bit. So I don't drink that weekend, and I go see this psychologist on a Monday, and I remember writing down $90 for 75 minutes. I thought, I'm paying this woman $90 where I can tell her what a rotten guy my dad is, and my wife's on my back, and I got these kids in private schools I'm having trouble paying for now, and blah, blah, blah. And she said, well, before we get started, I want to ask you a few questions. She said, how much do you drink? And I said, well, I don't drink. And she said, you don't drink at all? And I said, no, ma'am. And she said, well, did you ever drink? I said, yeah, I used to. She said, how long ago did you stop drinking? And I said, Thursday. Honest. Actually, that was a lie. I looked on my calendar. I quit drinking on Friday. I guess if I thought if I added a day to it, it'd sound like a longer time. This was Monday. And she said, well, how much did you drink? And honestly, to this day, I don't know. I never ran out. I wasn't out of money yet, and I had stashes, all kinds of stuff everywhere. My friend Tom Reese said I used to clink in the wintertime because I carried these little miniatures in my pocket. So I don't know. I told her as best I could. And then she asked me something that morning that just brought me to my knees because I was just hurting really bad that day. She said, do you take any drugs? And I just crumbled. I said, yeah, I do. And she said, well, what kind of drugs do you take? And I told her all the stuff I had prescriptions for and all the stuff I was getting from undocumented pharmacists or whatever you want to call them. And she said, do you have any drugs with you now? And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, well, what kind of drugs do you have with you right now? And I reached in my change and in my pocket, pulled out my change, and I started counting these pills that were just loose in my change. And I had 37 blue Valiums just loose in my change, and she thought that was a lot. But I'd quit drinking on Friday, and I was a little jumpy, so I bought 100 of them, and that's what I had left over on Monday. And she stopped the interview right there. She said, before we go any further, I want you to have an addiction evaluation done. And I thought, lady, I ain't even told you about my father yet. I got real problems here. I mean, I had no clue. I knew my life was falling apart, but I didn't know what grave danger it was. So I go to this other trained professional, and Diane comes along with me, and we fill out these questionnaires. And the guy gets us together, and he said, look, this is pretty standard stuff. It's not rocket science. He said, what you've written down here, he said, you've probably been an alcoholic for at least 15 years. And if you don't get some help pretty soon, you might die. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, how could you say that in front of my wife? You know, I don't know about you, but my ego will kill me trying to protect itself. It's how do I look? And that's why it has to be smashed. Thank goodness we have a fourth and fifth step and a ninth step to help smash that ego and make me right-sized. And Diane hadn't been to Al-Anon yet. She said, well, what can I do? And he said, pack his bags. That was another resentment. But he said, you need to go to treatment, go to AA. I said, look, I'm too busy to do that. My business is failing. I got to go back to work. He said, look, if you don't do something about your drinking, you're not going to have a business. You might die. And so I said, look, I can't go away for 30 days. So he tells me about this outpatient program where I could go for 6 weeks every night during the week and still work. And for the next couple of days before I go to see this lady in the treatment center, I was seeing billboards all over Nashville at that time. And I'm thinking, these people know I got good insurance. They're just trying to rip me off. I mean, I was in the position where one minute I would say, I can't live in my skin another 30 seconds like I'm living. And then a minute later, I think, well, I'm not that bad. And I'd go back and forth. It was just awful. So I go see the lady in the treatment center. She tells me about her program. I said, that's great what you people are doing. But I know how to quit drinking. You know, I'll just quit on my own, and I'll come back this fall when I'm not so busy, and I'll do your classes or whatever you're talking about. And this lady looked at me like I had 3 heads, you know. And that's when she said, just because you quit drinking doesn't mean you're going to quit hurting. And that's when I started learning about what alcoholism really was. And I didn't get a satisfactory answer to that till I was almost a year sober, and my sponsor took me to Memphis to hear Clancy for the first time. And Clancy said 2 things that night that really rang a bell with me. He said the natural state of an alcoholic that just stops drinking has growing depression and anxiety. And that's me when I stop drinking. I can't stand sobriety, man. I can't stand being dry. And the other thing he said that got my attention was the thing that makes sobriety, just not drinking, sobriety, a fatal disease, is that sobriety eventually becomes emotionally unbearable. And that's when I'd get to the point where when I'd quit drinking, I'd want to take my own life. So I knew I had to have these things. Well, I signed up for this treatment center. It's the first thing I've ever finished in my life. As a condition of going there, they said I had to go to 5 AA meetings a week. And I thought they meant 5 meetings. And they said, no, 5 meetings a week. And I said, man, I'm too busy to do that. Now, I want to tell you, I'm standing up here tonight. I'm really happy that I got a 34-year medallion in my pocket that I got back in February. And I'm real happy about the time I have. But I'm telling you, I never want to get too many years and not enough days. I mean, alcoholism, doing this deal in AA is a one day at a time thing. I'm just doing Thursday things on Thursday today. And I still go to about 5 meetings a week because I got to participate in my own recovery. I'm a lot safer and I feel a lot better if I build my life around AA rather than AA around my life when it's convenient. I made a decision to do this deal, just go all in, and I've never looked back, and I've never regretted the actions I've taken. So I find out about the Full Moon group, which was my home group for a long time, and I go there on a Friday night, and I get there, and the parking lot is full of cars. I mean, they're parked on the grass everywhere else. I thought, man, I've come on the wrong night. This church must be having some kind of big picnic or bazaar or vacation Bible school or something, I thought AA was a couple of old guys in trench coats shaking and puking on each other. I didn't know what AA was. But I get out of the car, and as I'm walking over, there's one guy that's late too. He's this musician, this singer I know, and that I recognized. And he came over to me, and I said, "You're so-and-so." And he said, "Yeah, that's right." And I introduced myself. I said, "Look, man, I love your voice and I love your band. I go see you at the Bluebird Cafe every time you're there." He said, "Man, I appreciate that." But he said, "Can I help you?" And he kept asking me that, "Can I help you?" And my mind goes to work. I'm thinking, this is a cool guy. He's still a cool guy, but he's just a cool guy. He can't belong to this A&A thing. I mean, he's a rock and roll guy. He must belong to this church, or he's going to do some kind of benefit for or something. My mind just goes 100 miles an hour. And the guy said, "Thanks, man, but can I help you?" And finally, I just said, "Look, I heard there was an AA meeting here." And he said, "Yeah, mate, you're in the right place." And this guy opened the front door for me to my first meeting. And I found out after I'd been there a few minutes that this guy had 4 years of sobriety. He might as well have been Bill Wilson to me. I mean, it floored me. Here's a guy that does rock and roll sober, because every time I went to see him, I was just fried out of my mind, And they seemed to know I was new. And they did a first step meeting for me. Every time I tell this, I go right back there. They gave me love and service, just like Dr. Bob believed in. I didn't have anywhere else to go, y'all. I had tried everything I knew with every substance or whatever to try to feel okay, and I failed. And I was 39. I thought, I didn't care if I died. I was afraid, but at some point I thought, you might live another 39 years that's miserable. And my friend Cliff from Oklahoma City says, if you make it to AA, you might as well stay here, because we don't refer you down to anywhere else. This is the last place, and this was the last place for me to go, and that's where, thank God they gave me that love and service. And they went around the room and they told a little bit about themselves, and one of the first guys there was this great big tall guy named Joe, and he said he'd had 2 DUIs in one day. Twice. And I've never had a DUI because I got out all mine. So I'm thinking, well, I'm not that bad. Another guy who was my sponsor for over 20 years, Terry, said he used to sleep with a pint of vodka every night. He said he was drinking this old vodka. He said it was so bad he didn't even think it had any vowels in the name of it. It was all C's and Z's. He said he'd wake up in the middle of the night shaking, and he'd reach under his pillow and pull out that pint of vodka and crack the top and drink about half of it, stop the shakes, put it back under his pillow, fall out a couple more hours till his alarm went off. And then when he came to, he'd be shaking again, so he'd drink the rest of the pint where he could shave, brush his teeth, put on a tie, go to work. He was a corporate executive at a large insurance company in town. And I'm thinking, I'm not that bad. Now I'm sitting there, I got nowhere else to go. I'm at the end of my rope. I got a loaded 9mm Smith & Wesson pistol in my pocket. I mean, I'm a dangerous person, and I'm thinking I'm not that bad. But by the end of the meeting, I wasn't listening to their consequences. The jails, the divorces, the bankruptcy, none of the consequences made any connection to me, but I felt their pain. You know, the thing that we have here, we have two things in AA that I hope we guard, that I guard with my life. We have identification. I can talk to another alcoholic in a couple of minutes and we speak the same language, and we have that, we're blessed for that. And the other thing is we have our unity. And if we screw up either one of those, I'm dead. I don't know about you. But I heard their pain and that they'd found a solution, that they didn't have to feel that way anymore. And that if I'd come on back and stick with them and just try to do this deal one day at a time, I could be okay. And that was the attraction. Well, then I'm getting out of this treatment center this 6th week, and I had to get a sponsor before they'd let me out. And there's this guy named Buff that I thought must be president of AA. I mean, he said good things to people, gave me his phone number the first night. And I thought, well, I'll get Buff to be my sponsor. But when I'm not drinking, I'm scared, shy. I don't like rejection or conflict or any of that stuff. I mean, I'm just freaked out around people. And so I thought, well, I'll get Buff to be my sponsor. So I go up to him after the meeting. I said, you know, Buff, before I get out of treatment next week, I got to get a sponsor. And he just looked at me and he said, well, you ought to ask somebody, and walked off. So I went back to him the next meeting and I said, Buff, will you be my sponsor? And he said, sure, I'll be glad to do that. He said, look, I want to tell you a couple things. He said, I'm going to be bone-crushing honest with you, and I want you to be bone-crushing honest with me. And he said, I go to a lot of meetings. And then he told me something else that just, I've never heard anything better in my life. He said, if you'll take the 12 steps with me, like I took them with my sponsor, your life is going to change whether you want it to or not. And that's the best news anybody's ever given me, because I see people go through the 12 steps and their lives change. Sometimes we see it change before they do. And I'd like to tell you, with that knowledge, that I took all the steps as fast as I could and my life got great. Nope. Where we read it, in how it works, that some of these we balked, I balked at all the steps. Every time I got a little relief, I'd quit until it got so painful that I couldn't stand it, whether I was going to drink again or blow my brains out or do the next step. But I got the first 3 steps pretty good, pretty easy. I knew I was powerless over alcohol. My life was a wreck. I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. You know, I gave up on God sometime after I got married. I remember going to church with my mom when I was little, and when I went off to college, I didn't go to church anymore. My parents would come visit me in Memphis, and I'd drive them around town. We'd go by this big cathedral, and I'd say, that's where I go to Mass on Sunday. I've never been at church in my life. And I got back, and Diane and I got married in a nice church, and the priest counseled us, and I went there for a while till he left, and then I left. And man, I was doing so many bad things. If there was a God, I was going to fry. You know, so I was afraid of God. But Buff said, why don't you just get on your knees and ask God to direct your day every morning, and get on your knees and thank him for keeping you sober. And he had to badger me a couple times to do that, but I basically did that to get him off my back, and something started happening. I can't explain what it was. And I got good at this praying. And later on, I would get this sickening rebellion, and I'd think, why am I doing this? I don't believe any of this stuff. But I heard a man named Mo Holleran say one time, you don't have to feel spiritual to be spiritual. It's all in action. So I kept taking those actions. So I'm going to meetings, I'm learning the lingo. I think I got the first 3 steps down. I read in the book the 3rd step prayer, and I didn't like the these and thous in it because it reminded me of church, so I retyped that in modern English. But I'm going to meetings, and I think I'm doing great. And I even said one night, there's some people here knew Frank Donnelly. He's been gone a long time. But I said in the meeting one night, I thought the promises were coming true for me, even though I was only on the 3rd step. And I shouldn't have said that in front of Frank, because he leaned over to me and he said, you're doing the alcoholic waltz. And I said, what's that, Frank? He said, 1, 2, 3, drunk. 1, 2, 3, drunk. And I thought, you old goat, what do you know? You got sober before the Civil War. I've been to treatment, you know. I know these things. And so they just let me go. And later on, man, I'm falling apart. I'm just falling apart. I last about 10.5 months on the first 3 steps, and it about killed me. And finally, I got so desperate that I did this 4th step that my sponsor wanted me to do. And I listed those resentments I had. I wrote them all down, and I wrote down what they'd done to me and how it affected me in the third column. I said, I kind of like this 4-step, you know, because I always fancied myself as being a people pleaser. I do all these things for people, then they turn on me. I had a guy tell me not long ago, said, if you think you're a people pleaser, just write down a list of all the people you've pleased. just 2 or 3 names. But then I wrote in that 4th column, what were my mistakes in those resentments? And I wrote down who I really was for the first time in my life, not who I was trying to pretend to be or make you think I was. I wrote down how I treated people. And I found out that the people that I had the biggest resentments towards were the people that were the closest to me, that loved me the most. And that's when I realized there was something wrong with me. So I prayed for the people like that says in the resentment prayer. And I made a fears list. I used to think I wasn't afraid of anything. You know, if you get enough whiskey in me, I think I'm a tough guy anyway. But I've spent my whole life with my back against the wall thinking I got to be a tough guy, and I was afraid of everything. Well, I listed these fears. It said we listed them in black and white. So I wrote down all these fears I had. And then it says we ask ourselves why we had them. So in the 2nd column, I wrote all these explanations of why I had these fears. And I thought my sponsor would be so proud that I wrote these, explained these. And personally, I thought, well, if I could explain my fears, I'm not going to have them. If I can outthink them, I won't have my fears. But that's just a drunk trap. The next sentence in the book says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And I looked at all my reasons and just might as well just wadded that up and threw it on the floor. It says we ask God to remove our fear and ask him what he would have us be. I never knew I had that tool, and it works. I did a sex inventory. I tried to remember every relationship I had, whether it was a one-night stand to the 15-year marriage I had with Diane at the time, and I might as well have written one story how I treated women and just dumped all the names in it. And it wasn't because I was malicious. It's I didn't know how to be a partner. And I'm selfish and I'm self-centered. So all my relationships were selfish and self-centered. And they all fell apart sooner or later because of that. And when I'm doing that, I tried to make amends to Diane the wrong way, and that didn't go well. And so I'm telling my sponsor, man, my marriage is doomed. And he said, no, why don't you just keep taking these actions, let God sort that out. So he showed me in the book where people that did a 5th step, the people that kept secrets, invariably they got drunk. And I believed what the book said. He said, you know, this book is not what Bill Wilson just dreamed up. This is the experience of the first 100 people that got sober and the ones that didn't. This is what worked and what didn't work. And the ones that kept secrets, invariably they got drunk. So I was afraid I was going to drink again. So I make a list of all these secrets that I thought I'd go to the grave with. And some of them I wrote down in code. So if somebody found a piece of paper, they wouldn't know what it meant. And I go over to his office, over to his apartment on a Saturday morning, and he invites God in the room. And he said, what's the worst thing on your list? And I looked down at the code, and I told him something I thought I'd never tell anybody. And instead of throwing me out of his house, he told me the worst thing that was on his 5th step list. Here's a man who loved me enough to share his deepest, darkest secret with me where I could get comfortable to empty this garbage can I was carrying around. And I want to tell you guys, I have a really good life today. It's not perfect, but I've got the best life I could ever imagine. And there's a part of me that wants to put all my past away and never look at it again. But that stuff has value. Our dark past is our greatest asset. I was listening to a guy's 5th step sometime back, and we got in a truck on a Saturday morning, and I said, what's the worst thing? I invited God in the truck with us, and I said, what's the worst thing on your list? And this guy told me something, and it was kind of general, so I asked him a question about it, and he answered my question. And then I just told him the worst thing that was on my 5th step because it doesn't have any power over me anymore. And he got real quiet, and I could see a shift in his eyes, and he said, man, I didn't tell you the truth a minute ago. Let me tell you what really happened. And if I hadn't been vulnerable enough to empty that garbage can that I used to carry around to make him comfortable, he might not have got that poison out, and he's still sober today. So that stuff has value. Well, we go over this list, and I tell him almost everything. But he said, have you left anything out? And I looked at the code, and I went, well, that's the same kind of stuff that I've already told him. So I didn't tell him, and he asked me, are you through? I said, yeah. And I'd look at the code, and I lied to him and said, no, I'm done. So I leave his apartment, and I go out to my office to do step 6 and 7, and I get about a block away, and all of a sudden I look up, and it just hits me like a brick that I didn't tell him everything. And what really connected the dots for me is for the first time in my life, I was thinking about this guy that was coming to our Monday night men's meeting that couldn't stay sober, and he had done a 5th step the week before that, and came to our meeting and said that he left something out and ate his lunch so bad that he got drunk, and he went to 202 that day and got another white chip. And for the first time, I thought, if he's a real alcoholic and I'm a real alcoholic, I got to do all this stuff. I don't get to do this stuff cafeteria style. I got to do it all. So I picked up my phone, I called Buff, I said, look, I left something out. And he starts laughing. And I'm saying, well, why are you laughing? He said, well, usually it takes a couple of hours before they call back. You're easy. What is it? And I told him, he said, I love you anyway. And I've got to tell a lot of guys that I love them anyway. Well, I read step 6 and 7, and there are 2 paragraphs, became entirely ready to have God remove all his defects of character and humbly ask him to remove our shortcomings. And I'm thinking, boom, boom, 2 steps in 5 minutes. But I just made a decision there that I know how I've loused up my life. I'm not going to be that way anymore. And so for the next couple of months, I was the same miserable guy I was, except I knew why. And that's when I realized I need a higher power to do this. So I'm making an amends list, and I want to tell you about a couple of amends. I made the list, and I gave them to my sponsor. And because I'd loused up the amends I tried to make to my wife, I gave them to him, and I said, please help me. And my sponsor has always dealt with me in plain language. I've got that since the day I walked in here. I get plain language here, and I get the truth. So I make this list, and I want to tell you about a couple of them. The first is to my wife. I love her dearly. He got me to write her a letter, and I wrote her the letter according to what he said, and she read it and tore it up in front of me. And I went back, I said, what'd he do? He said, well, that's the best we can do here, and that was his best interpretation, which was best than what I tried. And so I was hearing about living amends, about being the kind of husband and father she deserved, so I've done that, and I continue to do that. And 5.5 years later, we go to a counselor's office about something else and found out that amends wasn't done yet, and I got some information in there about how to make amends to her that she wanted. And I told my sponsor I didn't think that would work and she'd leave me. And he said, well, if she does, can you stay sober? And I prayed a lot, and I made the amends to Diane that she wanted. And I thought she'd leave me, and that was 28 years ago last December, and I've got a marriage today that's built on honesty and trust. And I work real hard trying to keep that slate clean. Now I want to tell you about my next door neighbor. My sponsor said, you don't just go somebody and tell them you're sorry. They know what a sorry son of a gun you are. He said, but you need to go over there and apologize to him and plant him another weeping cherry tree. He said, now you don't need to tell him you know how it died. So I'm coming home from the backroom meeting a couple days later, and I pull in my driveway, and I see him out there on his riding lawnmower. And my heart starts pounding. I stop my car at the foot of the driveway, and I put the car in park, and I said, God, I don't know exactly what I'm supposed to do here, but please give me the right words to say and do this. And I get out of the car, and I walk around the 6-foot high wood fence that I put up to screen him out after he sued me. And I start walking toward me, and he sees me walking over in his yard toward him on this lawnmower. He just freaks out. He's got this big wide-eyed look, and like, can I get this lawnmower in a high-def gear to outrun this guy, or do I abandon ship and run? But he turns the lawnmower off, and he comes over there to me. And I said, Mr. Logan, can I talk to you for a minute? And he said, sure, what is it? I said, I did a terrible thing cutting your trees down, and I've disrespected you and your wife for a long time, and all that was wrong. I'm trying to change some things in my life, and I don't know what I can ever do to make up for the damage I've caused you. But if there's anything I can do to make up for that, I'm willing to do whatever it is. Now, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't mean to say I'll do whatever you want me to do. I really didn't mean to say that, but I asked God to direct what came out of my mouth, and that's what I blurted out. And I thought the guy would just say, get off my property and don't come near me again. Because that's how I dealt with people who got in my way. I burned a bridge with them. And I thought everybody was like that. And I thought he would do that and it'd be over with. But instead, the man came over to me and he put his arms around me and he started hugging me and he started sobbing on my shoulder. And he held me for a while. And I'm just trembling. And he pulled back away from me and he looked me right dead in the eyes and he said, what's in the past is over. This man just forgave me for all that right there. And I'm just frozen because that's not what I expected. And my mind says, okay, he's forgiven you, run. I mean, I wanted to run away. And hear me out, if I hadn't had clear instructions from my sponsor about what to do, that's what I would have done. I'd have run away. But I heard Buff's voice saying, don't you run away, you got something to do here. And if I would have run away, I'd have missed what I'm going to get to tell you now. I'd have missed this. I said, look, I really appreciate you forgiving me, but I really want to do something to make up for this. And he looked at me again and he said, you already have by coming over here. He said, the thing that hurt my wife and I the most all these years is that we'd lost our neighbor. And we've been praying every day that we'd get our neighbor back, and now our prayers have been answered. Now I'd been pulling my driveway cussing him every day, and he'd been praying for me. My sponsor told me after he'd heard me tell his story a couple times, he said, you know, if you ever get to where your higher power's not big enough, why don't you just borrow Mr. Logan's for a while? And I said, well, I appreciate you forgiving me, but I really want to do something for this. He said, well, you already have. I said, well, I noticed your cherry tree died over there. Can I plant you another tree? He said, well, you don't have to do that. And I said, well, I'd like to if you'll let me. And he said, well, Miss Logan would like that. Well, I didn't have my people anymore. If you're new, don't take this wrong. But when I got sober, my business got worse for a couple of years because I made a lot of bad decisions for a long time, and it took a while for that to bottom out. And I got discouraged by that, by the way. I thought when I got sober, everything's just going to be great again, and it wasn't. But this is one of those times it wasn't doing too good. But my older son, who's almost 46, he'll be 46 next month, he was 12 at the time, and he and I went and got a bigger weeping cherry tree, and we planted it in this man's yard. And I got a letter from him a couple days later that I've carried in my big book that I get to read to you here. And this is dated June 26, 1991. Dear Mike, it was with much surprise that we found a beautiful cherry tree in our yard when we returned home yesterday. We had not expected it so soon. We appreciate it so very much, and we will care for it, and we will cherish it always, not only for its own sake, for it is a beautiful tree, but because it symbolizes a deep and lasting friendship between us and you and your family. We pray that God will bless you and your family in all that you do, and we pray for ourselves, for we are a sinful people by nature. There are none of us without fault, and we need his constant love and forgiveness. Again, we thank you for the tree. We're all the more grateful because you did not have to do it. Your friendship means more to us than you know. Most sincerely, George Logan. This man gave us a box of Omaha steaks for Christmas every year until he died after that. When my dad died about a year later, the first flowers that came to the funeral home was a wreath of purple orchids from Mr. Logan. I've still got one of those on my desk at home. He died about 6 years later, and you guys taught me to show up for weddings and funerals and graduations, stuff I used to be too busy or important for. But we suit up and show up. So I go to this big Baptist church in my neighborhood, and the place is packed. And I don't know anybody in there, but I'm in the receiving line. I'm shaking hands with these people I don't know, and I shake hands with this one guy, and he said, oh, you're Mr. Allison. Dad told us all about you. I'm going, oh, man, why did I come here? This man said, my dad said that you'd had a disagreement, but that you'd made it right. And you say, I'd have gone to the grave hating this man. I wouldn't have done that unless my sponsor told me how to make this amends. Well, my life gets good. I got the promises started coming true for me. I knew a new freedom, a new happiness. I got this 10th step that stay current because I'm an alcoholic and human being where I can do quick inventories, make amends, and move on. I got this 11th step that I get to know this God that I don't understand, but I don't have to. I gave up on that. I just trust God and know that he's working in my life. And I had a spiritual awakening as a result of steps, and I'm trying to live this way of life. And I mean, I think I'm doing wonderful. I'm in AA, Diane's in Al-Anon. Our sons are in Al-Teen, we're in Al-Dog and Al-Cat and everything you can belong to. And one day I get a call from my younger son's 8th grade principal and says, we caught your son with some weed in his tennis shoe, and we got zero tolerance. He's out for a year. Come get him now. And I thought, you don't understand. We're the recovery family. But he got in the alternative learning center, and I had to leave work every day a little after 1 o'clock and drive all the way into Nashville and pick him up at the ALC and either take him to our house out in Oak Hill or back out to my sod farm way out in the western part of the county. And I had to work extra hours for a year. Now, I got contempt prior to investigation. I think, is this my reward for staying sober, sponsor all these guys that my kid gets kicked out of school for weed and I got to work extra hours for a year? I'm such a knucklehead. You know, it forced me to spend time with my son every day that I wouldn't have spent because I worked all the time. And I got to know him on a level that's priceless today. He's 42 years old. He's lived in Northern California for 22 years now. He's a lot like me. Drugs and alcohol have just beat him really hard his whole life, and he tries his way of dealing with that, and he and I can talk about that because I have that relationship with him. And I told him one time, I said, look, I want you to know, you know how much time I spend in AA, but I want you to know I love you just the way you are. If you don't ever go 8A, that's your business. If it's some help to you, I hope maybe it is. But I said, I want you to know I love you just the way you are. And he said, well, I appreciate you telling me that, but I see what it's doing for you. I'm out of time, guys. I love this way of life. I love being able to share these things with you. I get to relive all that when I come here. And a couple things. There's two things. I thought the grace of God entered my life when I got sober, because I still can't believe I got sober the day I did. But I know today I've been wrong about that. The grace of God's always there. It was always there. And at my darkest hour, when I was walking in the darkness of hell in the late stages of my alcoholism, there was still a light trying to pull me. The light's always there, and my job today is embrace the grace and walk toward that light and not walk toward that darkness. There's a whole lot more light there ahead if I just keep walking toward it. And the other thing is I thought when I made amends to all these people, I had all these dumpster fires in my life, and I thought, well, I've got that fixed now. What I didn't know is that some of the amends I made, some of them 30 years ago, are still paying me dividends today. That doesn't mean I rest on my laurels and say, look what I did 30 years ago, but it keeps me in the game and realize just because I'm trying to fix this right now, it's going to keep paying me dividends along as I keep going, because my whole life was like a weed patch. I was just a patch of weeds when I came here, and the steps allowed me to cut all the weeds down and plant some good seed. And when the good seed started sprouting, I had good crops growing. And when you have good crops, it reseeds better crops, and that's how this deal works. And I didn't know that when I came in. Nobody told me that. I want to close with something. This is from Daily Reflections on December 2nd on Serenity. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps. That's from the 12 and 12, page 106. And the comment is, as I continued to go to meetings and work the steps, something began to happen to me. I felt confused because I wasn't sure what it was that I was feeling. And then I realized I was experiencing serenity. It was a good feeling, but where did it come from? Then I realized it had come as a result of these steps. The program may not always be easy to practice, but I had to acknowledge that my serenity had come to me after working the steps. As I work the steps in everything I do, practicing these principles in all my affairs, now I find that I'm awake to God, to others, and to myself. The spiritual awakening I've enjoyed as a result of working the steps is the awareness that I'm no longer alone. And I know you guys started this meeting a year ago, and you're no longer alone, and you have those 3 legacies to follow toward that light. I really appreciate you listening to me tonight. I love God, I love AA, I love all you, and I really do love this good life. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here.